Okay, I think we are currently live. Everything is up and running. Hello, everyone.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, cool, fantastic. We're up and running. So, hello, everyone. As I mentioned, we are doing our third and probably final for this book, sort of fireside chat about the mechanics of the BNS edition, Volume 2. I don't really know how easily to describe this book.
Volume 2, Issue 1.
Yeah, Volume 2, Issue 1. Point is, this is our third and probably final video. Our last two videos were covering the merits and then the techniques. Today we're going to be talking about sort of the additional mechanics. Because those aren't going to take nearly... Oh my god, it's bright. Because those aren't going to take nearly as long comparatively as the merits and the techniques did, what we're also going to do with this video is we're going to spend some time at the end just sort of talking about game philosophy and design philosophy and sort of what we look for in games and where a lot of the arguments we've made over the last two videos and over this video come from, sort of what perspective we have that led to those decisions. Now, this is being on my feed. This is a live video that is not behind a filter, so if you're watching this and this seems really weird to you, it is... That's it. That's it. Yeah, I'm a nerd. Fucking hang tight.
If you were expecting this video, this is probably still pretty weird. Like, this is an unhealthy amount of time to sink into a book that
was only like
for a role-playing game mechanical
long.
system. Yeah, this is inappropriate and alarming.
The original goal of these videos was to save people time who didn't want to have to read through the whole book to know about the mechanics.
But then we made 8 hours, and we realized that's basically an audiobook. But worse. In every meaningful way. Anyway, so we're talking about the mechanics for the new BNS book system. In this video, like I said, we're really going to talk about sort of the core rules of dramatic systems update, rather than the specific powers updates that came before. Jacob is going to be our MC, mostly by dint of being a lot soberer than I am right now.
And not eating salad like me.
And not eating salad like Shannon, who didn't want to do it. So there you go. Jacob?
Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start off with what might have been the most hyped core system update, and in my opinion, the most disappointing, which is the update to the Beast Trait system. Here's the problem. There isn't a change to the Beast Trait system in this book. There is not a new system. There's barely a new mechanic in this chapter. So I'm going to go over exactly what has been added in this book, and then talk about why I think it's a bad idea. And then we'll maybe get into some discussion of what you want to look for.
Sorry, we're not snapping at the camera. My dog is being a real pain in the ass.
Go away.
Shanda, please go downstairs.
And then we'll get into a little bit of what you
Stay
look
away
for.
from the trash, Shanda.
Okay.
What you look for in a morality system, and what it is supposed to do, and what you want it to do. So, the new Beast Trait system, the new Beast Trait section in this book, adds two very important tables, which are flat-out improvements from the core book, that go into more detail on what can result in gaining beast traits. How do I commit a sin at level 1 or level 2 or so on? Focusing not on specific actions, but on general categories of actions. Inflicting temporary harm versus inflicting permanent harm versus so on. Not just physical acts, but also recognizing different forms of emotional torture. So, Malkavians, your days of getting away when the Bruja were getting nailed are at an end. That's very good. Expanded table on different frenzy triggers, focusing especially important on rage frenzy being provoked not just by taking damage or being offended physically, but through insults. It has always been a little bit frustrating that theoretically you should be able to trigger Bruja's frenzy just by insulting them, and in practice it is very, very difficult to do that, outlining clearly that at a certain level of beast traits, snide remarks should provoke a frenzy test. That's good. Which is why it's so irritating that they also put in a mechanic that allows you to render frenzy moot. This is the riding the wave mechanic, which is a throwback to a fairly difficult Requiem mechanic in which people were able to direct and control their frenzy. In this case, you may choose to ride the wave when you feel a frenzy coming along.
I want to stop real fast. I want you to know Jacob keeps looking to the side like he's reading the book, but all we have up on the other screen is the cover page of the chapter and the outline of the book. So this is actually from memory. He's just convincing himself he's referencing material. I just want you to know what kind of person you're dealing with.
I feel like you don't have to at me like that.
But I did!
Riding the wave, when you feel a frenzy trigger coming on, you can shift yourself into riding that frenzy instead of fulfilling it. In which case, there are certain roleplay requirements that you must fulfill. Now, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that roleplay requirements are a totally unenforceable standard that are completely meaningless compared to the hard mechanics that an actual system represents. Even though I do feel that way. But seriously, the roleplay requirements are significant and they are noticeable, but they carry with them none of the requirements or penalties that frenzy represent. So if the point of the beast trait system is that as I am accumulating beast traits, I am becoming more and more afraid of frenzy, if frenzy is supposed to be something that I fear, then riding the wave removes that fear. On top of which, riding the wave requires no test. There is no difficulty in utilizing that mechanic. It is a choice that I make if I decide I don't want to frenzy. With that mechanic put in place, I can decide to not learn the frenzy rules. I can decide that they do not apply to me, and I have to act angry, act afraid, or act hungry until the storyteller says, okay, you have fulfilled this role-playing requirement. That undermines what is supposed to be one of the core mechanics of this morality system. Frenzy is what is supposed to make everyone upset about them accumulating beast traits. It is what everyone has to pay attention to. It forces you to acknowledge that the beast is controlling you.
So that was a lot of words.
So I'm going to go ahead, pause here. There's more to talk about in the beast trait system. But Joe.
Well, so let's go ahead, because I'm going to have a lot to say on the subject. So, Shannon, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about, Jacob just kind of semi-fast, semi-slow walked us through the concept of the new beast trait and frenzy mechanics in the system, particularly with regards to riding the wave and, what was the other thing we really talked about? The gaining of beast traits and how that works in this game. Shannon, thoughts, opinions?
So, in the past, now specifically in Requiem, I played a very frenzy-happy character, and in doing that, you're in the middle of roleplay, something happens, and you have to ask the storyteller to come over so you can make a frenzy check. And that kind of just breaks up the roleplay. Now, it is kind of nice that there isn't a test, because that, doesn't stop the roleplay. You go into this I act kind of angry roleplay scene or moment more afraid or hungry or whatever. And you go through it, which is nice. It means you don't have to stop the storyteller from whatever they're doing. It helps with a couple things, but it is kind of, even all that aside, it's still rather weak. Just what Jacob said, it's supposed to be a scary thing that you're, going to frenzy. Especially, I think, in a cam game, where you're trying to be, the monster in the suit. You don't want the monster to show. You want the person in the suit to show, unless you're playing, character. But besides that, it really should be more problematic. But it sounds like this is a bit of an easy out. And just when it comes to beast traits, honestly, I have not looked really at them or thought too much about them. Just because there's something that generally don't come up too often. They probably should come up more, but they generally don't.
So, this gets to one of my first rants of this video, and I know a lot of people watching this video now are not people who are normally in my gaming circles, so this is very fun for me watching the names pop up for who's watching. But when we talk about game design philosophy, we talk about what makes a good versus a bad game, particularly when we're talking about competitive role-playing games, tabletop or LARP, whatever they might be. One of the things that we're really, really looking for are for rule systems that are, generally speaking, objective. They are absent any bias for a specific group or a specific character. When we talk about game balance, what that really means is, mechanically speaking, this book does not create bias for one or another characters. Or at least the bias that it creates is reasonable and tolerable for playing and creating a game. My problem with morality traits in any system, and particularly in this one, is that they don't make sense in that paradigm. When you're talking about creating a game that doesn't force you to play it in a specific way, it just gives you the ability to play it competitively from lots of angles. One of the things you're really looking for is for the game to have as little narrative argument as possible. You want the game to say, there is value in making the bad guy decision, right? The value is that you get more immediate power. And there's value in making the good guy decision. The value is that you have better interpersonal connections, you have a better team, and long term you have more stability and control. And that's the inherent balance of good versus evil in any role-playing system that makes the game compelling and interesting. The world is interesting because there are good reasons to be a bad guy and good reasons to be a good guy. So when you introduce morality mechanics like beast traits and frenzy, you create problems with that because there's very little real argument in terms of whether or not frenzy is a good or a bad mechanic. For most people, most of the time, it is a bad, useless thing that no one cares about. For very specific builds that rely on Valerian, builds that have executioner, things like that rely on frenzy. Frenzy is a good thing you should do every day all the time and is easily canceled out once you're tired of using it. So this weird sort of mechanical system that was created to try and litigate and decide what is good or bad to do instead just becomes this sort of by the numbers, how do I trick the game that I'm playing into playing by my rules? And that's just, that creates a weaker, less interesting game because where once the author wanted you to ask questions about morality, now they just kind of want you to play Sudoku where morality is one of the axes.
One of the big things that made Frenzy good in the core book, and that hurt beast traits, is that frenzying was a mechanic that was integrated into all of the other mechanical systems in the book, and beast traits were not. there are powers that let you frenzy. There are powers that let you get the benefit of frenzying without any of the penalties.
Because a lot of people have just joined this video, we're talking about the rules for a role-playing game. It's like if WoW was something people did for fun in the real world. So if this seems vaguely satanic to you, yeah.
There are powers that you can only use if you are frenzied. There's one power that I've always thought was really cool, but that has never been useful ever, which is a power that lets you automatically control anyone who is in frenzy, but only works if it's a natural frenzy.
Yeah, so all the people who don't want to do frenzy just won't. So your power sucks. All the people who do want to do frenzy will do it unnaturally, so your power sucks.
Which power is that?
Controlling the savage beast.
Yeah.
It's a technique.
It's a garbage technique.
It's a technique that I've always wanted to find a way to make good, but so one of the fastest ways to make a mechanic bad in a book that you are writing, probably the easiest, is to make it ignorable. Frenzy is not ignorable. There are clear mechanical benefits and penalties. There are clear consequences for what happens if you frenzy. When you are in frenzy, you have control over your character, but there are things that you must do and there are things that you cannot do, and that forces you to pay attention to it. There are powers that hinge on the state of frenzy. You are at a disadvantage if you ignore how frenzy works. Compare that in the core system to beast traits. Nothing about them mattered. There was a technique that gave you beast traits if you used it, and you managed that carefully. Outside of that, go to an average game and ask, how does the beast trait system work? Most people are going to shrug and say, I don't know, and your mechanics guy in the corner is going to say, wait a second, let me grab the book. Because it was a system that did not matter. It was a system that was not integrated into the game. So here's what I like about what they've done in this book. They have taken steps to integrate the beast trait system into the other mechanics. There are multiple techniques that will incur beast traits for using them. I don't know if it's necessarily enough. I think one of those techniques that we discussed last time, the beast traits for retests, is a little too much of a benefit for the penalties that beast traits represent, especially now that you have a get-out-of-jail-free card for Frenzy, which is supposed to be the primary consequence of beast traits, but so on. There are integrated mechanics to beast traits that make it harder for people to ignore them, and that is a good decision. The other thing that I really like that they added is a rule just stuck down in a little footnote that suggests, hey, one storyteller running a mass combat for 20 people probably doesn't have time at the end to sit down and hand out beast traits and then run 20 degradation tests. Hey, anyone remember what a degradation test is? Yeah. Instead, the brilliant decision of, if you notice yourself doing something that you should get a beast trait for, assign it to yourself, and for being a good sport, claim a free willpower. Which would have been crazy, but in this book, they went with the general theme of willpower is cheaper, and it is easier to get willpower refreshes. And so that basic incentive of learn the beast trait system yourself, give yourself beast traits as you notice yourself earning them, and have a small incentive to continue to do that, that's excellent. That is a good decision. But I don't even have anything else to go through in this chapter, because everything else in this something 30-page section is role-playing guides.
Hi there, Karen.
Hi, Karen. How you doing?
And role-playing guides are useful. they are helpful to understanding what the system thinks it is, what it is trying to do, how you want to respond. They're a good idea, but it's not an update to the system. And if you think that beast traits didn't work before, probably your mind hasn't been changed by this chapter.
Yeah, what I'll say, I mean, you know, I kind of give my general argument that I don't like morality systems in games anyway, unless they are balanced to make good and bad both equally difficult, or equally good or equally bad decisions. You know, when you're talking about mechanics for systems, one of the things you always want to go back to are what are the great video games of all time? You know, what video games stick in the public consciousness for specific reasons, and how do they affect when you're writing a tabletop or a LARP or whatever kind of role-playing game you're writing. And one of my all-time favorites is Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Star Wars role-playing game. And what was best about it was that narratively it wanted you to make this sort of gray moral decision of you know, siding with the both good and bad are kind of bad choices because they're both extremist positions. But mechanically, it gave you a really, really strong incentive to go far to the good or far to the bad in terms of the morality mechanic. And so that was really meaningful in the game, and it made the decisions in the game much more difficult, because when you were trying to decide, you know, mechanically the decision is obviously to do X thing, but the character that I'm trying to portray or the character that I'm trying to build would definitely make this decision instead. And that was one of the very first games that really made a morality mechanic that really made you have to ask that question of, do I want to do the thing that is good mechanically for my build, or do I want to do the thing that informs the story well?
And doesn't get me yelled at by Kreia.
Yeah, and doesn't make Kreia fucking bitch at me for the next 20 minutes. But the point is that when you're writing morality mechanics for any game, be it video game, be it tabletop, be it LARP, whatever, what you're pursuing is this idea that there's incentive for being good, there's incentive for being bad, but there are narrative decisions that make both of those probably not the perfect call. And beast traits just have never been that. Vampire the Masquerade tries to purport itself to be this question of moral degeneracy, and it's not. It's quite possibly the most elegant mechanical and political game ever written, but there's not really that much moral question to be asked.
Especially in a LARP setting. Eric just brought something up that I agree with 100%, which is that morality stories are often tedious and uncomfortable unless the player and the storyteller walk in with the specific idea of exploring that and a specific understanding of how they want to do it. If your story involves some level of moral fall, then by all means, I want you to be able to explore that story. But morality is not ever going to be described satisfyingly in a mechanic, because it turns out that we've been trying to figure it out for 6,000 years and we're only barely there. A system that when I want to go into a morally ambiguous, complex world and play a young vampire trying to figure out how to live in a world where he can only make bad choices, I'm not fond of, okay, well, you did the bad thing, so take 3 bad guy points and go sit in the back. That is unsatisfying. Having some mechanic tying and having said that, let me turn around and say why I think the beast trait system is my favorite approach to LARP morality, which is that Vampire the Masquerade is primarily a story about a game of resource management. It is a game where you have only so many things at your disposal and you have to make every one of them count. In Joe's terms, it is a game with 5 people. Go ahead.
Whenever I'm training young storytellers, or really in any game that is a competitive design like Vampire the Masquerade, I say the actual premise of your game, regardless of what you think it is, the actual premise of your game is that you have 5 players, you have 4 cows, and every player must have a cow to survive. That's it. You create fewer resources than there are needs for those resources, and then you tell people how to kill each other over those resources. That's the core of all drama. That's the core of all human drama, and much more importantly, that's the core of all narrative drama.
Beast traits, what they really incentivize is that you manage your inhumanity. The beast trait system, what it is supposed to be, and what it does a pretty good job of being on paper, is a system that punishes wanton, rampant evil and rewards very carefully managed evil. You have to make the decision of, can I afford to kill this person, or am I going to have to do too many heinous things tonight? Making that sort of careful bargain, thinking not just about morality loss, but in a couple of hours, I'm going to be in the middle of a political debate with this elder. Can I afford the possibility that he'll get me to frenzy on Elysium? Can I afford to do this now? That sentence is the core of every PC's story in Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
So, honestly, as far as morality systems go, I think Changeling the Lost Clarity system is far better.
In 2.0.
In 2.0, mostly because...
I would say in 1.0 as well.
I think in 1.0 it works pretty well because it's less about doing good and more about doing things that are similar to your trauma.
Yeah.
So
it's more it's a bit more personalized and not this kind of good versus evil angel demon on your shoulders kind of thing.
I agree with that. I think that Changeling 1.0 still suffers from the overall 1.0 flaw of this Victorian morality where doing evil is equated with mental failures and mental health problems. And Changeling gets the furthest from that, but it's still...
What I would say... Honestly, my favorite morality system, absent bias and other factors, is probably the D&D and Pathfinder morality system of lawful and chaotic, right? Lawful and chaotic and good and evil. And there was this sort of balance of none of these things is better than the other, but each of them unlocks different ways of mechanically building your character. You know, when we do these videos, we constantly talk about mechanics are the backbone on which you build the narrative. And when you're talking about morality, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, okay, if I do a bunch of evil shit, what does that unlock for me? One of the things, for all its faults, one of the things Requiem at least did have was that idea of, like, the amount of cruac you had was limited by your humanity. And the amount of, whatever the fucking...
Theban sorcery.
Theban sorcery was limited based on your humanity in the other direction. And that was really important because it meant that there were good mechanical reasons to be both heroic and villainous. And I would like for beast traits to do that, and also beast traits don't do that. And I feel like we've kind of hammered that point all the way the fuck to death.
Yeah. One more thing I want to mention about beast traits is, personally, I hate it when there are a zillion things you have to track when you're doing your character, like, in the moment.
Yeah, when you're in a 15-on-3 box,
Blood,
there's a lot of traits to keep track of.
Willpower, beast traits.
Especially when you're ADD like me, I have enough of a hard time keeping track of my health and blood and willpower. Having to throw in beast traits would be hellish for me. And it was also, that's one of my issues I had with APOC. I felt like there were too many things that you had to track because I believe they had something similar to beast traits.
Well, they had Rage, they had Seethe, they had
Gnosis,
they had Gnosis.
Some of them had
willpower.
blood.
Once you start factoring things like the Spirit Cloud, there were definitely a lot
It
of...
was absurd.
there were a lot of numbers to track in that
Rage.
system.
So you needed a spreadsheet to, like,
run combat.
to do anything.
Yeah. And
To,
I mean,
walk
like,
into
the thing,
room.
the thing that I'm, like, best at when we're talking about role-playing game combat is that I can keep track of everything that's happening in my head. That's what I specialize in combat. I know where everyone is. If a cat destroys the entire board, I can recreate it from memory. But every time you add a new thing that I have to track, like, you dramatically increase the severity of the headache I will experience after that game. And I hate you personally for it.
That's another reason that beast traits are, to a degree, ignorable. Joe and I storytell our local Sabat game, and we see a lot of mass combat, partially because we're dicks and partially because our players are insane.
And make weird assumptions that bother me to this day.
But when I'm running a combat, I can approximately keep track of how much blood are different people spending, and you've spent a lot of willpower. Are you sure that you can spend that one? And I know you spent your archetype
One
already.
of the things, real quick to interject, that Jacob and I do when we're running these mass combats of like 20 on 20 with these crazy powers flying back and forth, is when one of us says something that the other thinks, you know, if Jacob says to me, like, I spend this power, and we're in Everyman 15, and he's spending Gnosis, and I'm like, check. And that's all we do every time, is we just check. And what that kind of means is, hey, what you just did sounds like bullshit. Could you make sure it's not bullshit?
Which is not to say I won't play with people I think are cheaters.
Yeah.
We are absolutely not calling any of our players out. But mass combats get stressful. There are a lot of numbers to keep track of. And because of how many we have run, we're pretty good at keeping track of those numbers. Beast traits don't get assigned in combat.
Yep.
And so you don't have that additional external voice of your storyteller who, right after getting done with the mass combat, does not want to then sit down again with people and
start
try to
legislating
remember
fucking-
what
yeah.
happened in it and talk
become
about
a
the
parole
reasons
officer.
for why.
Yeah.
And without that, when the storyteller doesn't want to have the conversation with you, it's real easy to ignore it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like we've beat this horse into the ground, and it has stopped spitting out money. So let's go ahead and move on to the quest system. Now, we have some opinions on the quest system.
Yeah.
Namely, it is, in theory, a very useful idea, very useful tool, and a pretty well-designed one that is frequently misused. Namely, if you run quests at game, I do not like your game.
You're just babysitting your players or giving them.
Yeah.
It's like sticking the kid in front of the TV.
Yeah.
Is what you're doing.
Quests are an excellent way to run downtime systems where you don't want to sheet 30 NPCs for someone's private plot, or need some way of agitating a question that mechanics don't speak to, but that you want to have a possibility of success and a possibility of failure. They are awful for what I have seen several storytellers do of, there are 3 different things that have to happen in order for this big con plot to succeed. So here's a piece of paper we're putting down at a table, sit down and run this quest. I don't care. At the end of it, I'm going to have accumulated some number of penalties, and I'll go over to you and say, we did it. And they'll check that box off and take 5 health levels off of the big bad, or remove 3 NPCs from the final combat, and that's not fun. That's not a good story.
If doing homework, forcing players to do homework is the only way to get them to engage in the game,
Give me the Coke.
then think,
But,
do something.
Hang on.
go ahead.
I'm gonna pour more Coke in this because holy fuck.
Wimp.
It was half full of rum.
It is too much rum. Anyway. So, quests are tricky. Before we go into our whole conversation of why this book does quests better than they were previously done, which, by the way, like, I know we got real negative in our discussion of beast rates. I actually really like what they did with quests here.
I'm in love with it.
This video will be a net positive just because they did really good stuff with quests. When quests were first introduced, and I read them in the book, I liked them a lot. I, as a storyteller, hate downtimes. I hate them. I think that they take away attention from the live game, and they make people more interested in pursuing questions over email than they would when they're actually role-playing. And to me, that's the worst case scenario.
Also, they're fucking exhausting.
They really are. Don't get me wrong. I have, as a player, I've had characters who really went after downtimes. When Rob ran our cam game, my Tremere ate downtimes for breakfast and loved doing it.
I played in his Sabat game.
And he ate downtimes for breakfast. But the distinction there is that that's a game where downtimes are used to make the dramatic moments of the game bigger and more impactful. And that's exhausting as a storyteller. That is horrifyingly tiring as a storyteller. Because what you're running into is just, you are on the job all the time, and you're miserable with it. And so, quests, to me, when they first were written in the Apocalypse book, were a brilliant solution. Absolute genius. It was, okay, players want to pursue shit, you're too tired to run it, they know the mechanics, they can do all that shit over email and just let you know, hey, here's what we came up with. And then you send them back like 500 words on the narrative of what happened. That's a perfect world. I was immediately in love with the quest mechanics. Then I went to a game, and there were envelopes with quests in them. I hate that shit. If I wanted to tell people what my character was doing, I'd just sit at a table.
Write a book.
The point of live action is that it's live action. And I hate shit that ends in me sitting in a circle with some other motherfuckers talking about stuff.
Nobody is cool in narrated...
Yeah. That's why I shy away from narrated combat in any mechanical system. Not because I don't think it'll be a fair response, but because I think it's boring. It ruins what we all spent our time doing, which was building this system. So yeah.
Yeah.
I hated quests.
Why put together the whole costume and everything if you're going to be sitting at a table and all you can see is from here up?
Now
like,
with all of that said, the quest systems in this game are amazing.
Especially it's
so good.
It feels now
so
like
good.
This was a mechanic ready designed for Masquerade. APOC, you've got the natural,
which is incredibly unexpected.
You've got the natural desire of, especially with the name,
right?
We might need to
It's an
rename
epic
it
thing.
when using in Masquerade. But in APOC,
Spy shit.
it made sense for things like the regular patrolling of the cairn and making talons and fetishes and fulfilling these routine tasks that you needed to be doing for your society. But Masquerade is full of those because everyone's a sneaky motherfucker. I'm willing to bet that at one point or another, if you have ST'd Masquerade before, then a player has come to you asking this question, or if you've played Masquerade before, you have at least thought of this question of, that guy is kind of shady, and I would like to look into his history. I want to, study... The narrative suggests that, people... study each other and go back through all the story of who they are and what they've done in kindred society. And Alt ID certainly suggests that creating a false past is important for passing. So I'm going to go to the storyteller and say, I want to look into that guy's past. And the storyteller goes, well, you can't. Because how would you even, what would that,
Yeah, and
no. I'm saying no. I can't let you do that.
the point Jacob is sort of
Dancing
jokingly
around.
stuttering at is that there didn't exist mechanics for a lot of things that it felt like mechanics should exist for. There were a lot of questions that came up of like, hey, that dude's not what that dude says that dude is. Can I do something about that? And as a storyteller, as someone who was trying to deal with the mechanics of this game, you were like, nah, sorry.
Here's something really frustrating about Alt ID. 9 times out of 10, you don't need to take it.
Yeah.
I walk into game and I say, I am a Nosferatu.
Just lie.
And they go, well, you're not acknowledged.
Lying is so easy.
Haven't joined the cam yet. You should join the cam. Okay? Cool.
I need you to know that most of the things that I've done in any mechanical system had nothing to do with the mechanics. I just lied.
There are no verifiable mechanics for calling out those lies. Most of the time, that's good. But there are some things where it feels like the system has failed you.
It's just,
like,
I'm sorry, I keep interjecting, but like, I see friends from when I was in the Navy and people from when I was at the agency just like jumping into this video where we're doing super deep cuts about Vampire the Masquerade. I need you to know, this is not as weird as it gets. This is barely scratching the surface, and if this seems weird to you, yeah. Anyway.
And yeah, as Matt just brought up, especially with some of the new rules in this book, vampires warring over control of territory, both territory in terms of just feeding grounds, but also territory in terms of I want control of this company, or I want control of all gas stations. Having a solid, good system that can agitate that is really great. And I want to emphasize, the quest system isn't just useful and filling an important niche in the system. It's a well put together set of rules.
It makes sense. It is a logical construction that guides you through the process of completing tasks.
Especially in terms of consequences that you will feel.
Yeah.
There are solid penalties that will make you hurt.
It's not, yeah. In Werewolf, one of the problems of Apocalypse is that you're like, oh, there's a god, and it doesn't like us? Well, let's quest at it until it dies.
Yeah. You can use a quest to go to Malpheus.
Which...
with 2 characters.
Alright.
Alright.
But
One of the other things that's also really important for Masquerade is that quests are good as a mechanic so long as they are not acknowledged anywhere else in the book. As soon as mechanics come up to make you better at quests, they make you better at solving problems outside of game.
Yeah.
And that's bad.
Quests are a wide range of things.
Yeah. So the reason why quests are so amazing in Masquerade is because no one's better at them. Everyone could do things better or worse in the game, but when it comes to the quest itself, no one's better at doing those. And that makes those mechanics a simple resolution system rather than something you can game. Whereas in APOC, quests were cool, new, and shiny, and every motherfucker with a merit did some shit to quests.
It was a solved game.
Yeah.
We've talked a whole bunch. Shannon, what do you think about quests in Masquerade?
In Masquerade, I think it is a good idea. It definitely will give people a chance to really think about what they're doing with their downtimes when they're putting these things together. Before, instead of just going like, I patrol the area, or I feed. Now, Joe and Jacob will ask, how do you feed? And things like that. But this kind of forces players to think about, okay, how do I actually do this? How do I, get around the city when I am, a blood-spattered child-looking thing? So there are definitely a good amount of things that this definitely will help for players, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and Matt brought up a point there of that there are people who are better at quests than others, and that's true. The distinction is that in Apocalypse there were people who were substantially better at quests to the point that it modified the balance of the game.
Yeah. Grab a
Whereas-
silent strider. and
Exactly.
Also,
Whereas now, people who are better at quests are just sort of incidentally better at quests. They're already people who would have been better at doing things in downtime because that's what they specialize in.
I'll also contest, I wouldn't necessarily say that they are specifically better at quests. I think they are better at a lot of the things that you will naturally use quests to decide. They always had a leg up on doing those things
Yeah.
within the confines of the system. But there are things that quests can be used for that backgrounds won't generally speak to.
Yeah.
And that's why ultimately it's a more satisfying experience. You were already going to be good at that, whereas in APOC, it was a key to a mechanical system that wasn't designed around anything in particular.
Yeah, and definitely going back to the Silent Striders, it was the only thing you were good at.
Yeah.
Like, there was, why are you at game? Just, like, okay, tell me what you need me to say I did.
And
Okay.
without quests, the backgrounds build would still be
Oh,
a
yeah.
viable build.
It's still, yeah.
It's still a super good build.
Okay, I think we've
Yeah.
pretty well expressed our opinions on that.
Stock locations.
It's so good. So,
So we're gonna make the stock location discussion a quick one because I don't think we have a lot of in-depth stuff to say on it, and
They're
then
just
Joe
good.
has a whole thing.
yeah.
So the thing that every storyteller ever taking over a Masquerade game has wanted to do, and the thing that every storyteller has eventually given up on, is this idea of, I want territory to really matter. I want people to be able to control different locations and get mechanical benefits if they get the good locations, and get mechanical penalties if they get the bad locations, and force people to really play the I want to control the city game.
Yeah.
The reason I know that every storyteller has done that is Joe did it, and I did it, and 4 other
Rob.
people I've talked to did it.
Everyone
Every
has done it.
time you give up, because constructing that system whole cloth, and more importantly getting people to care about it and pay attention to it and believe that it matters is fucking hard. And so integrating this system, that I'm not going to read it all out loud because there's a whole bunch of stuff. Suffice to say, you can control a location. Those locations will have different mechanics associated with them that you benefit from when you're at that location. Other people can attack that location and try to take it from you, or try to make it worse. You can try to defend it. Those benefits apply to all range of types of characters. It's beautiful. It makes you care. No longer is it a situation of, my haven got burned down. Okay, I go stay at my friend's haven and wait for my background dots to replenish, and then get second haven with identical qualities that is in a slightly different location. Fucking, I don't care how immortal a vampire you are, you try finding a new place to live in Philadelphia in 1 month. It can't be done.
Unless you're a gangrel and your haven is the earth.
It's a beautiful system. I love it. I wish I had it 10 years ago, before I was even LARPing. That's how much I like it.
But then, sweetie, you couldn't have gone and used your black hand status to
Oh,
get the
shut
couch
up.
for like 3 months.
On top of this, stock location rules have specific applications for both supernatural qualities and a specific set of qualities that can be held by Elysia. The idea being that Elysia have an almost supernatural level of reverence in vampiric and occasionally other communities that empower them to have specific mechanics that vampires pay attention to. With that summary out of the way, Joe, I understand that you have one or two feelings about Elysium.
Alright, so here's what we're gonna do. In just a moment, I'm going to give you a speech about Elysium, one which I know that Jacob and Shannon will largely agree with, and therefore we're not going to make a big topic of discussion. After that, each of us is going to take a turn. We'll start with Jacob, Shannon, pick a number between 1 and 2.
1.
2.
There's 1. Jacob will go first, Shannon will go second, I will go third. What will happen is you will get 2 minutes to make an argument for something about a game, about gaming in general, that you think is important for people to know that they probably don't or likely don't watching this video. Basically the soapbox you would like to be on in terms of LARPing. After that, we'll have 5 minutes of discussion of the topic, and then we'll move on to the next person. Leading into that, I will give you this speech because, as you can see, Jacob and Shannon just learned about that premise for this discussion, so I want to give them time to think about their arguments. So, to do that, I'm going to talk about Elysium. When you're building a game that is fundamentally about who can or cannot kill one another, there are some fundamental challenges you have to face. For example, why do people show up? This is, whenever you're talking to someone who's running a new game, this is one of the hardest questions and most unexpectedly hard questions to answer. Just, why are people here? Do they show up because they've done it every month for 50 years and it's just habit now? Do they do it because there's an important conversation being had? Do they do it because this is just where the community meets up? Why are people here? What about the premise of your thing is compelling attendance? And in Vampire, that's a really tough question a lot of the time. Obviously, you have the simple, the prince said we're having court tonight, but unless the prince is a fucking maniac, you're not really expecting them to punish you for not showing up. And if you're an elder, what are a few months? And so there's this really questioning premise of, why is every game important for you to show up as your character? And most of the time, it is because if you miss a month, people are going to take actions you don't expect. They're going to take actions you can't react to, and the game is going to advance without you. The motivation to attend the game is that the game will change. The problem of Elysium is that it limits the scope and the extent of that change. If you have a game on Elysium, what everyone coming into your game knows is no one's going to start a fight. If your law is you can't try and cause a fight, you can't use powers on anybody, you can't whatever, no one's going to do that. No one's going to violate the policies of Elysium. And if they do, it will be a very big deal. It will be something that everyone responds to. It will be something that everyone punishes. The social contract is strict, it is clear, and it is understood. And the problem with that is that there is no ambiguity in your game. Anytime you're playing on Elysium, it is black and white. Did you violate the law? Did you not violate the law? When you're not playing on Elysium, there are gradations, there are questions. It is, hey, you did something kind of creepy and weird, but like, is that a bad guy thing to do? I don't know. Is that just a you're a vampire thing to do? Maybe. And there's ambiguity, and ambiguity is important for a social game. So the problem of Elysia is that they remove ambiguity, and they create a situation where everyone has to rigorously enforce the law, and there's no opportunity for deceit. And that is why Elysia are just bad. And that's why, despite the fact that the stock location rules for the book are amazing, and I love them, I still hate the Elysium rules, because I think that the concept of Elysium is shitty. Now,
Real quick,
Jacob.
one of the biggest mental whiplashes I ever experienced was in a LARP with Joe, Masquerade game, where we were not on an Elysium, and I was doing something. I had something that I cared about. And Joe was playing a 6th Gen Tremere, and he walked up to me and he said, "Dominate, give me that thing." And I handed it to him, and he walked away. And I went, "Wait, but he's not allowed to... But..." And I thought about it for a while, and eventually what I came to is, why would a 6th gen Tremere ever not do that? That is part of... If you want Masquerade to be a horrifying game, if you want horror to be an element, there's not many better ways than the idea that you are coexisting next to creatures thousands of years old who routinely violate your free will just as a matter of convenience.
Yeah, if you're an elder, you're not using Dominate to assert your will. You're using Dominate because it's just a little bit faster.
That object was his. If he had said, "Neonate, give me that thing," I would have said, "Yes, vaunted elder." But
it was just very slightly easier to dominate. And that's kind of the key.
that would have been a violation of Elysium.
Exactly.
That disconcerting, kind of freaky moment where I realized that I am not as safe as I think I am is just as much a violation as him shooting me in the head.
In a competitive system, every action is at least metaphorically violent. And when you ban even metaphorical violence, you remove motivation from that system. Elysium bad.
Elysium fixable if you take a machete to what constitutes violating an Elysium with the prince's courtesies. Like you can do some.
You can have
interesting
Elysia if your keeper of Elysium is an alcoholic.
things. That too.
I really like if you look at the rules of Elysium and you think about the concept of enforcing them. That's the best.
Also,
that's the answer.
Okay, I know that we're about to do our soapboxes, but real quick, tiny Elysia soapbox. I keep seeing this shit about Elysia that, like, fairies and werewolves respect because vampires want to invite them to their gatherings.
Why?
And why?
Why do you want to invite
Why?
them?
What's the...
What?
What is the part... No... Why?
Yeah, just flat out.
Both on the part of why would a werewolf or a fae want to show up, and why would a vampire want them there?
No,
I'm
so-
in for a
so-
night of politicking.
Yeah, so you can make an argument that werewolves are interested in other supernatural creatures because werewolves have geographic territory. They care about, I own this acre, right? And so if a vampire is in that acre, they have geographically violated that territory. You can make an argument that changelings are interested in other supernaturals because changelings have a vested interest in keeping the human populace inert or keeping them basically under their emotional control. And so it's important to them that humans are being affected emotionally by other people. Vampires drink blood. Fuck a werewolf. You cannot come into this city again. Dope. There's another one next door. I'll go over there. Sorry to be rude. That's on me, man. Hope you have a great afternoon.
For the record, anyone who is in any level of doubt about vampires versus werewolves, as soon as we got the APOC book, Joe and I sat down, built 5 vampires versus 5 werewolves at the same XP, and I think I was running the vampires, he was running the werewolves. I think I did 3 points of damage.
It was fucking lead weights through tissue paper. It was
Identical
horrifying.
XP.
And that's just flat out. They're just crazy better. But that's the thing, is that werewolves could have an argument for why they care that people are around. Changelings can have an argument for why they care that people are around. But if you're playing a vampire in the world of Masquerade, your only reasonable response to other beings is, oh, I'm in your stuff? Sorry, my bad, I'll move. Because you don't care. They're mortal.
Yeah.
They'll just die later.
Go away for like
Yeah.
40, 50 years.
Go take a nap. When you wake up, they're gone. Why would you give a fuck?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that's why cross venue sucks.
And even like you can get away with not as much in Vampire. I don't really like werewolves or fae in Vampire. In APOC, vampires are a good antagonist. As servants of the worm,
They're an interesting antagonist.
they're
yeah.
viable.
Yeah, you
say.
can do stuff with that.
But I would never understand why you would want to socialize with them.
Yeah.
Alicia, the sole purpose of Alicia is being able to interact with other creatures without fear of violence breaking out. And I don't have anything interesting to say to a werewolf except, ugh, ugh.
It's kind of the same thing of why do you want to pretend to be one with them. Like,
Yeah.
Just...
It's a like, the only defense I will ever have for that technique that allows you to pass as a werewolf is it's a technique that was written for an APOC game, so that I can have an NPC
so that you can
show up. But that should show up in the APOC book, in the storyteller only section, as hey, vampires are allowed to do this. Hey, vampires are also allowed to mimic changelings. That's a thing that you can do. You don't need it for your dedicated vampire game.
So I mean, it's very clear that when they wrote the Masquerade book for BNS, they weren't positive they were going to get to write anymore.
Abyssal mysticism.
Yeah, well, not just that, but the Masquerade book in general is a very self-contained world. So the mechanics that let you infiltrate werewolves or let you interact with fae were very clearly written in a way that mechanically there wasn't much to them, and narratively it was just the storyteller getting to reskin them using stock NPC rules and using sort of those basic storytelling mechanics in the back of the book. And Masquerade was very good for that. The power that let you infiltrate werewolves made for a really cool character. A character whose thing was you hunted werewolves. You probably wouldn't get to do a lot of your werewolfy shit during the average game, but when it came up, it made your character really interesting and important, and it gave you a reason to keep coming back. And so that was what was good about that mechanic, is that it gave you a way to interact with plot that was meaningful and allowed other players to connect to plots or designs they otherwise wouldn't have been able to reach. But when you introduce entire books of shit, it stops being about that, and it starts being about how can I get my hands on that clave that hits werewolves for explosion damage. Fucking, hey, I'm a Tremere, and also this is my stick that is the sun that also is your dead. Like, that's the problem of when you start adding other mechanics to your system. Mechanically, it just, by design, becomes a race for those mechanics. And I hate that. The best tabletop game in the world is Symbaroum. And the reason for that, besides a bunch of other reasons, is that it's one book that you can effectively run a lot of campaigns out of. And what's great about Masquerade is that it's one book that you can run a LARP out of.
We do not want to return to the heyday of 30 books for Vampire plus an addenda telling you which parts of which of them we can use.
Yep.
One book. Now, eventually 2 books. That's, but it's manageable.
And you know what? When the next one comes out and we're at 3, if that one isn't the same kind of par that this book has been, okay.
I mean, they're going to release an omnibus that puts all of them together.
But, like, 3 books for a game, that's not unreasonable.
No.
But when you start adding 3 books for Vampire, 3 books for Werewolf, 3 books for Changeling, 3 books for fucking mummies, 3 books for
an extra book
zombies
for what
with
all
anxiety.
of them were doing in New Orleans,
Yeah.
with a couple of mechanics thrown in to make people pay attention.
3 books for fucking Martians who speak Spanish.
A book for what everyone is doing in hell and on the moon.
And all of these books have cross-referential mechanics. All of a sudden, your real simple vampire game just got ape shit.
Yeah.
And that's one of the simplest reasons, besides all the balance problems, and there are a lot of those, that cross-venue is a bad thing. And it shouldn't happen.
Yeah. It's not great when you have to read like 15 books, because nobody has time for that in their lives. Well,
And I mean, that's excusing all of the discussions of books are written with particular themes.
Yeah.
We've talked about how Vampire the Masquerade is a game of resource management and a careful struggle between the human and the beast, not in terms of choosing one or the other, but managing the fight between them. And you throw that out when you go into APOC with a vampire, because now vampires are servants of the worm advancing its evil agenda. And that's fine in APOC. In APOC,
Because you can
vampires are
afford them to be
useful under
two-dimensional.
that story. But in Masquerade, they have to be one thing, and in APOC, they represent something else, and allowing the two to meet, APOC allows a degree of some vampires are good, but it doesn't allow for fully three-dimensional vampires. And
you can sort of turn it down to an aphorism of a good game is one in which players compete for the story, and a bad game is one in which stories compete for the player base.
I like that. I also like that, Yeah,
Yep.
I like that. Alright, I think we've probably exhausted that, so...
Horses beaten.
Soapboxes.
Soapboxes! Robots
It's
in
in
disguise.
disguise.
Jacob.
So, what I would like to try to do, I know that there are a lot of people who maybe respect, or at least tolerate, the amount of attention that we give to mechanics, but think that it is not the important aspect of a LARP, that it would even go so far as to say that it is an actively unimportant aspect of the LARP. The story should always trump mechanics, and any time the two come into conflict, you should put story above. Mechanics are not the only thing. Sometimes they're the only thing I care about. I'll be honest about that. But mechanics are a crucial, integral part of your story. Because mechanics are how we distinguish... How to say it? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell a story. Of the first LARP character that I ever played.
In 75 seconds.
His name was Morinth Dacrin.
I loved him.
yes.
This was a Nosferatu Circle of the Crone who was convinced through various bullshit that I pulled that he had not been sired. He was not created by a vampire. He had been born out of the gods of the darkness, sent onto Earth to do their will
He
and
was an
be their
Evanescence
avatar.
song with a character sheet.
And
The name of
he
a Mass
walked
Effect
around
character.
threatening
I love
and shouting and demanding that people submit to his will. And he bid a 7 to attack. And he bid a 3 to defend.
You did not mishear that shit.
And his initiative was a 9.
In Requiem.
The problem, for those who haven't played it, the maximum pool is going to sit around a 25 for all three of those, and I just listed a 7, a 4, and a 9. Let it go.
It was bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
The point of mechanics is that they support your story. And when I try to talk people out of mechanical decisions, I'm not saying that you are wrong for playing this sheet, or you are wrong for wanting this mechanic. I am trying to tell you that the story that you think that you are telling and the mechanic that you are putting on your character do not agree with each other. If you don't want to be a combat monkey, if you don't want to be a warrior, fine. If you're going to be a gardener, you should take the gardening powers. You should take the gardening mechanics.
Let's garden.
Eric, I built a quarter of Riley's sheet. It was bad.
Keep going.
whatever you think you're supposed to be good at, make yourself good at that. And learn the mechanics such that you can do that. The metaphor that I like as a Harry Potter nerd is both Gilderoy Lockhart and Mad-Eye Moody think they are running the same sheet. One of them is right, and the other one is full of shit. And if we don't have mechanics and are running a fully Nordic-style game, then the one who talks louder sounds cooler, and suddenly Gilderoy Lockhart is the head Auror of the Harry Potter universe. But mechanics are what agitate those conflicts. And that is why you don't need to study them to the obsessive detail that we do, but you are not allowed to not care about mechanics. They are the rules of the universe that you live on. You must pay attention to them.
And soapbox.
Yes.
Shannon, what do you have to say about what Jacob just said?
Mechanics really help define who your character is. And since Jacob talked about Morinth as an example of the bad side of it, I will
never
talk...
live out that shame.
Apparently he did a French accent once.
Oh, God.
On a time.
I
You know
forgot
what time
that
it
part.
Jacob does not do accents.
I was officially banned from ever doing an accent on any character ever again.
It was the one game that he played in before I joined. I don't think I would have married him if I heard the accent.
It was bad.
Yeah. Anyway, I will talk about Cordelia Kane, who is my changeling character and my favorite character I've ever created, probably. Maybe Joan. But I digress. Cordelia Kane, her big thing was she wanted to be safe. She wanted to make sure other people were safe. And she wanted to be able to escape any situation that she could possibly be trapped in. And all of those things go into background of the character. But because of that, using the changeling rules, I was a character who could get into everything and escape anything using all of the changeling powers, separation, the smoke, and all those kind of things. But I also had powers that weren't super great mechanically, but still fulfilled the concept. So it is a big thing where mechanics are important because they can help fulfill your character and make your character better at everything, pretty much.
I have nothing to say on this subject. Or nothing to add on this subject. I agree with everything that was just said. Shannon, would you like to get on your soapbox?
Yeah, I have to think for half a second longer. So one of the thing I wanted to get on, my soapbox, makes me tall.
Mic drop.
Is I wanted to talk about LARP does not just require costuming, it requires stage setting. Sometimes you'll go to a game, a lot of times you'll go to a game, and there really isn't much of anything as far as arranging the place or anything to make it seem like the location that you're supposed to be at. So you are pretending to be in like this grand cathedral or something, but you're sitting in someone's basement or at a rec center, just kind of sitting around. One of the things with WPI that we really try and do, and Jackie Terranova has done a pretty good job, along with the rest of the props team, is try and get kind of themed gatherings and CAM and have a lot of props to fill out the space and make it feel like we're not in an office space or not in a church rec room. And it really helps because it creates the feeling that you are more that you're there. It helps you stay in character. It makes it much more serious because you're so much more involved in it when you have other things to kind of interact with. And it also just looks so much better. It's just better for the players to be there and to see this place all set up. It's supposed to be, a whole party, and there's thought put into it. It's not something that's been pulled out of a hat. And it doesn't have to be super expensive and elaborate like you'll see at some con games or things like that, but there's a lot you can do with just some simple things like tablecloths or some candles, things you can reuse for different games and different situations, and it really helps create a much better atmosphere and a more enjoyable place for people to play. I just think that is really important, and actually putting thought into these kind of things is an important part of the LARPing experience, and I think storyteller teams should have a bit more support to help bring that about, because it shouldn't just fall to the storytellers. They got a lot to do. Too much to do.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
Nothing to add to that.
I agree with all that. I want to especially make the point that this is a snowball effect. When I feel like the setting matches the game, it is easier for me to get in character, and it is easier for me to buy that you are not a somewhat schlubby 30-year-old white nerd, but you are Elder McSerious Pants the Third, 3,000-year-old terrifying Ventro. When we play this game, we're asking a lot of our suspension of disbelief. That is why costuming is important. And it doesn't just, as Shannon has said, it doesn't just stop with costuming. We need to buy into the location that we are not being terribly mundane. I'll go ahead and plug for a second that WPI, a recently launched national organization, is dedicated to supporting a higher quality of standard for your local parlor LARP, offering the expertise and assistance that you need in order to bring your game to the next level. So, check us out.
Yeah.
With a recently launched Connected Masquerade Chronicle, launching its first historical game tomorrow and going live fully in August. So,
First historical games in 2 days.
2 days. What day is it?
No, it's Wednesday.
3 days.
It's Saturday. Saturday is
Today is Wednesday.
Today is
oh
Wednesday.
My god.
Okay.
Okay. Existential crisis here. Moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I have to say. I agree with Shannon 100% here. Every bit that you can do to get people buying into the universe that they are trying to believe in and play in matters.
Yeah. And if you just put some thought into it, it can look really cool. And I don't want to make it sound like, not putting thought into it, but sometimes people aren't. So just one of the coolest things I did in the church where we have our Masquerade and APOC games, or used to have APOC, we don't have that anymore, was something as simple as the side room was supposed to be a cave, so it was dark, lit with some of the lights like on the walls. The table was covered with green to be like moss and just some basic, there were like cardboard stepping stones on the ground. So, and that just kind of built this atmosphere that this place was something different or something similar. Sarah Helwig did a really cool Queen Ananazi setup with all sorts of spider webs and everything, and you can get across themes by just going through and changing the settings. Specifically with that, Queen Ananazi was getting more power, so spider webs and spiders started showing up in other places. So it's just little teeny things that help further the game, further the themes of it, and even can help further plot.
All right, Joe, your soapbox.
My soapbox. So I talk a lot about game design and design philosophy, and my soapbox is actually going to be pretty short. Really what it boils down to is good games are competitive by nature. They involve some inherent element of competition. That is not to say that they can't be friendly, that's not to say they can't be fun, but they require competition. They require legitimately adversarial interaction. And so whenever you're building a game, whenever you're building the mechanics for a game, you should always ask, in what way does this number affect the... What am I looking for here? In what way does this number affect the competition of this game? Does it make one person or the other more likely to win? And when it does so, is that rewarding cleverness, or is it just a flat reward? Is it something that we should encourage, or is it something that's accidental? And so when you're building a mechanical system, your job should always be to understand how those mechanics will affect the competition between your players. And I think that, by and large, this book does a very good job of it. I think mostly where it fails is when it relies upon beast traits. I think they don't cut it, really. And I think this book needed them to cut it more than they do. But yeah, I think it's a great book. I think it informs a lot of what I like about storytelling. But there are definitely problems where there are mechanics that don't seem to affect anything that matters. So that's it. Thanks for watching.
Well, excuse me, motherfucker.
I think Joe wants to go to bed.
That's fair.
I'm starting to get tired. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, so
I can go to sleep.
we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We've got we'll make it this one a 2-hour video as opposed to our 4-hour videos.
Progress.
Woo!
So
Short.
Joe left us with basically his final thoughts on this book because we have finally covered the full book. So mine. It's fine. It's
Fine.
It's fine.
It's
fine.
fine.
It's fine.
It's
It's
fine.
fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
It is better than I expected. I was very, very nervous with new mechanics coming out. There were some 40, 30 techniques in the core book, and they, on a whim, raised the number to 75 in the new book. And it was fucking... I was nervous.
That bar went up.
There are some genuinely bad mechanics in this book.
Yeah.
There are a couple of mechanics that I genuinely love, and yes, I'm gonna eat a goddamn shoe over it, so
Stay tuned.
y'all can stop fucking asking. On the whole, if I could go back in time and make it so this book wasn't released, I guess I wouldn't. I guess I would go ahead and let it exist and instead go back in time and, like, shoot myself as a middle schooler, because that kid made some bad decisions. I can't quite say that I like it, but I'm hopeful about what it's going to do to the game that I love. I think that this book will be a net positive. That's what I've got.
For me, I think I really just need to see it in play. I will have a much better idea of how all this stuff works, actually using it and playing with it, rather than just reading it. I can't picture it like these two guys can, of how all this stuff will work out. So I'm definitely going to have to see. And, I mean, it looks pretty good. One of the things that kind of concerns me is with the merits. Some of the things that they give make it pretty obvious what you are if people have lore in it, or spend a quest or a couple quests looking something up, or looking into your past. So I think it's just I'll have to see how that plays with infiltrator type characters, in, you know, like the non followers of said clans. So we'll see. And I think Joe's
Cool. So, yeah, we've all kind of given our thesis statements about this game and our books, or this book.
Hit a total of about 10 hours of discussion on what was supposed to be like a night of Joe and I bitching as we read mechanics out loud to Shannon.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you're interested in more stuff, please, in the comments, leave questions or thoughts about what you'd like to see discussed in future videos, so that if we choose to do those, we have good topics.
Yeah.
And so that we can know whether or not there's an audience
demand.
for
Yeah.
doing this. Otherwise, we'll just drink and talk about mechanics without a camera on.
And I'll try to schedule it for days that I slept the night before and I'm not dozing off in the middle. Good night.
Night.
Turned it off.